Patty, tell me a little bit about, where you guys from Verizon's perspectives see the sort of recent advances and where is that taking us, referencing the energy sector?
Sure. Well, and Adam, I've been around the energy vertical for probably more than 15 years at this point, working with large utilities. And when you think about machine to machine, also known as IoT, Internet of Things, that's one. I'm not going to say it more than 3 times, or I'll try not to. When you think about that, machine to machine has been around for a very, very long time. It's now to that point with all of the technology advances, with just moving into 4G, and then we're looking at moving into 5G as well. The operational cost of that network has significantly come down from previous technologies, which makes the technology more scalable financially for all of these utilities. So because of that, that gives us the opportunity to really look at the art of the possible and what can we do with that technology to further drive value for the utility consumer and just efficiencies for the overall utility.
So the cost of creating this hyper-connected environment down, so that barrier is manageable. You put this network in and you create all of these connections. Now what? Because it's one of those things that happens within the technology ecosystem, just in general. We sell the technology, but don't necessarily do a great job of selling the value or the business value back to the utility. So based on your experience, I mean, where is the value? What are utilities seeing that when we have this ecosystem, this is what we can do that we couldn't do before, and here's the value to us?
Yeah. So initially, all of these utilities started looking at, okay, how can we reduce our truck rolls? And then when you start putting technology in the meters or collector points, whether it's a mesh network or whether it's a point-to-point connection within the utility, being able to remote read those meters, remote shut off, remote turn on, that reduces the truck rolls. That gives them the ability to not have to roll a truck in order to do what I would consider very, very simple things. So that was the first piece. Let's reduce our truck rolls. And there were utilities that within the first 6 months of rolling out this technology reduced their truck rolls by more than 300,000. There's a hard cost and hard dollars to being able to reduce those truck rolls. So then the next phase of that, they look at, okay, we're now collecting this data, and every utility is architected a little bit differently. Some may read in 15-minute intervals, so they're collecting this data. They may read a meter 96 times in one day if they're reading in that interval. Okay, well then what do we do with that data? So I believe kind of the next phase of what we're going to see here is being able to be more prescriptive and predictive based on the analytics of that data. And it's not someone combing through a report to say, wait, what could we have done differently here? It's having the intelligence of that data make automated decisions around what the grid needs to do.
Because again, when we were preparing for that interview, for this interview, you were saying that there's no point looking at the data and finding out a month later that, hang on, the data could have told us.
Right.
But just going back to that truck roll number, which you mentioned, 300,000, is that almost enough to validate the investment case of the networks? And then you're just adding and building because you've got that.
Yes.
My point is you've got to start somewhere. Because
That's right.
If you listen to the whole holistic view of technologies, you get baffled. You're like, well, where do I start? Where's my first business case?
Exactly. So I believe the reduced truck rolls gets it done out of the gate for just the overall network investment. And then it's about sweetening the pot of what you could do with the reduced truck rolls, the intelligence of the data. We at Verizon like to look at, is it aware? So is the sensor aware of what we're trying to do? Is it autonomous, and is it actionable? And that comes into the automated decision making of the data that you're collecting, is can we take action based on that data that we're collecting? And I was having a conversation with a colleague, and it's almost like we talked a lot about big data, and then we're talking now a lot about IoT, and it's almost kind of roles reverse. We needed to make sure we've got the technology, now we've got the big data, so what do we do with that big data to make sure that it's driving the ultimate value in the decisions that are being made real time?
And when you look at areas where, that predictive decision making is in place, people talk about data centers and so on. So we know we can write the algorithms, we know we can deploy it. What do you think is one of the big things that the energy sector needs to do in terms of fully realizing the value? I mean, we heard in today's opening session that, okay, you can do it in a point network, but if you actually join all of it up, there's a lot more to be had. I mean, can you just bring that to life a little bit in terms of, the work you do with utilities? What's the value that the utilities are getting who are pushing to the edge of this predictive intelligence?
Well, exactly. So the ability to make those real-time decisions at the edge and being able to connect multiple things. And so we talk about the Internet of Things, and that could be a number of different things that we're all connecting in this one network and the different points that are collecting the data. So I think that's the biggest probably value that's come to light recently, is being able to make those decisions at the edge. A couple of other things that Verizon's doing around intelligent video, all of those things are done at the edge. So it's not traveling back anywhere to make decisions. And that's going to be, in my opinion, the next big thing, where we're making those decisions out at the edge and we're not having to come back into the head-end. So
this is the other thing that I always talk about, is how much of a mindset change is that for utility operators? They're used to having a central SCADA environment. Mm-hmm. Everything rolls to the center and rolls mm-hmm. back out again. There must be some sort of cultural human shift that needs to happen, where you go, you know what, I'm going to trust this tech. Right. I'm going to trust that meter to talk to that meter and switch that and turn that on.
Yes, and I think that is a little bit tough of an adjustment for the utility to make, but I think the utilities, and I remember back when the smart grid, AMI, AMR, that all started rolling out, and that was very, very different because they were used to having a meter reader go and read each of those meters. And so they started trusting that data. So I think it's one step at a time, and how they're they've got to have a phased approach in order to trust that data. I will tell you that all of the big investor-owned utilities that I work with have very much become forward-thinking in their approach and the way that they're looking at the technology. When you go to the Distributech conference, you don't just see utility-type things or hardware-type things. You see technology everywhere, because the technology is going to enable them to do what is necessary, which ultimately will drive the best value overall, not only for the utility, but for the consumer as well.
So let's talk about value a little bit. I mean, I'm sure at Verizon or in your job, you've done some modeling around that. Look, if we can push this decision making out to the edge and we can create that ecosystem, I mean, can you share some sort of dollars and cents or percentages, a little bit like with the truck rolls? I mean, that's a very proven business case, but what happens when we push it out to the edge?
Yeah, so it's going to be different for every utility, and as I mentioned earlier, every utility is architected differently, whether it's a point-to-point or whether it's a mesh network with a collector point. So that's kind of hard to give you that percentage on, just by nature of they're all a little bit different. But I believe the percentage is going to be substantial for all of the utilities, and less or more for some based on how they deploy the technology.
Because this is one of the things that I always find interesting about this industry, and it does a lot of pilots.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's pilot after pilot after pilot, and we've been talking about pushing intelligence to the edge for quite some time. Mm-hmm. And the sensoring is there, the data is there for sure. Is the issue that we need to really get some veracity around the predictive algorithms that we put on the edge? Is it that maturity that needs to be pushed out before this really tips? Because it makes sense on paper, doesn't it? It makes sense in the models. But in order for people to trust, what's the thing that's blocking it?
I think at this point and stage in the game, with all of the data that's been collected thus far, we absolutely have the ability to create those algorithms that will then be able to be pushed to the edge to be able to intelligently make those automated decisions. So yes, I do believe that we have enough data to go off of to feel confident in the decisions that the utility would allow the edge to make.
Do the utilities feel confident though?
That's the ultimate question, Adam. I think some do, others probably do not. But as I said, the industry has made great strides in just allowing the technology enablement and trusting the technology to help them do a better job.
And just because I'm conscious of time here, and one of the other things that we talked about when we were preparing for this, and again, we want to drive some value to our viewers in terms of, okay, how do I go about with this? It seems to me that this is the next frontier where, there was a lot of talk about why do I need to put in a smart meter? What do I get out of that? That's kind of done. But the same narrative is happening with this predictive intelligence side of things. In your experience, and Verizon being a technology company, what's your advice in terms of the roadmap that people should do so that they can get into this and be confident of the decision making?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this last week, just in our smart communities efforts. Verizon is partnering with all of the big utilities and the cities to say, hey, how can we come together as three, involve the community, and what's that customer engagement model look like? So very much like Verizon has a consumer base that we're engaging with and the different demographics of that consumer base, the utility has a very, very similar type scenario as we do. So then it's how do you get that engagement from the consumer and how do you show that value? And so one of the things that we're doing there is with that smart communities effort and seeing what we can drive from digital signage to intelligent video, gunshot detection, and if you have that blanketed throughout the cities, I do believe there is a value for the consumer. I know one of the things that one of the utilities I do work with, they have outage notification. So if you're set up and signed up for that as the consumer, if you have a power outage, they're going to call you. You do not have to call them. They're going to keep you in the loop if you're signed up for text notifications around what the ETA for the power to come back on is, and they're going to keep you involved the entire time throughout that process. There's no longer calling the utility to say, hey, my power is out, and maybe waiting on hold for 20 or 30 minutes. It's that direct proactive involvement, and that's some of the decision making that the grid is doing back into this consumer that's automated. So when you combine all of those things together, smart communities, partnering with the city, the utility, and the technology advances that we're seeing, there's going to be great, great value for the consumer as we move down the road.
So just a last question before we finish, because everybody who I ask this question to, like predictive intelligence at the edge, very quickly starts talking about the consumer and bringing the consumer in, but then equally rapidly starts talking about we need to push this automation further into the consumer's home, otherwise this doesn't work. Do you think that's like the killer connection we need to make?
Yeah, I do believe that it is, and some are further along than others, but I believe if we can make that connection and get that involvement, and there could be some type of incentives that the utility does for the consumer. I know that some utilities are looking at that. What's the rewards program for the consumers by signing up for the text notification or the outage notifications? We currently reside in a society that likes rewards, and all the different, I know I travel a lot. Marriott points, Southwest points, all the airline points, I'm very much addicted to making sure I get those points. So some utilities are looking at ways of how do we further engage the consumer, and those are some of the things that they're looking at. And I think when you look at the segmentation of the consumers across the different markets, and if you can appeal to some level of what those demographics look like, the segmentation of that, I think it's going to be a win-win for the utility and the consumer.
Perfect. And Patty, on that note, we must leave it because we've come to the end of our time, getting all sorts of strange signals from my crew. Thank you very much for watching. This has been another Engerati interview at Itron Utility Week. I hope you enjoyed it. Message from this interview, truck rolls alone will pay for your network investment, and then you're just on a journey like everybody else, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks for watching.
All right. Thanks, Adam.